Yes, Glenn.
All right. Our major topic for this meeting, for this morning, you can tell I've been on Nantucket for the weekend. My mouth isn't working very well. Is our guest, John Washek, who's the founder of Edgemere Consulting, based in Lynn. I think it was 93, right? Not quite 63. That it was founded. They're consultants to public housing authorities across the United States. And John is going to talk today about Lynn's new five-year consolidated plan. A note about John, he's a graduate, he's got a BA from BU and a Master's of Public Administration from the Harvard Kennedy School. So John, you're on.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Thanks for inviting me in today. And thank you, Glenn, for the introduction. Actually, we were a Lynn-based business until 2 weeks ago, and I just relocated to, I just relocated to North Carolina. So,
Wow.
So above me is the fan and the air conditioning is in the background, and it's a hot day down here. So anyway, it's nice to be back in touch with Lynn. My company works for the city on this project, the housing community, the community development department, and we're working closely with the city and LHAN, the Lynn Housing Authority and Neighborhood Development, to prepare the city's consolidated plan. I want to just walk you through a few slides to give you some background on this project, in case for those of you who are not familiar with it. Colin, do you have the slides?
Yeah, coming right now.
Okay, all right. And we'll just go right to the second slide where we talk about the agenda, which is today to, if we can go to the next slide, that'd be great. And the next one. There you go. Okay, is to provide you with some information on the consolidated plan and the annual action plan process. Talk about the Cdbg Home Investment Partnership and Emergency Solutions Grant funding. And most importantly, to provide an opportunity for discussion about the business community perspective and the perspectives of the folks who are on this call on the needs and priorities for the consolidated plan. So just first of all, a little bit of background, what you see here on this slide. What's the consolidated plan? It's a planning document. It's required by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, also known as HUD, to support the city's application for Cdbg, home, and ESG funds. The plan describes the city's housing and community development priorities and goals, and it's based on an assessment of needs, market conditions, and available resources. It's completed by the city every 5 years, and it's also completed around the country by cities and states and towns every 5 years. And as we speak, the city is preparing a new consolidated plan that covers the fiscal years 2021 to 2025. The city's fiscal years are a little different than the federal fiscal years. Not that you care too much about that, but the bottom line is this plan is actually retroactive to July 2020. The reason for that is because of the COVID waivers that were passed by Congress, which allows for different timetables in light of the pandemic. So if we could go to the next slide. In addition to the consolidated plan, or I should say as part of it, every year, while the consolidated plan covers a 5-year period, there's an annual action plan that's produced every year, and it incorporates public process in order to adopt it. The annual plan describes specific projects that the city intends to undertake with the 3 funding sources listed here. And it's based on the overall needs and priorities from the consolidated plan. That annual action plan has information on each project, and every year there may be dozens of projects that are funded. And as I mentioned, it's done every year. In this particular case, HUD waived the timetable, and the city is actually in the process of submitting 2 annual action plans, one for fiscal year 2021 and one for the upcoming year, which is 2022. And if we could go to the next slide, please. So if you're really interested in the subject, you can go online and learn probably more than you'd ever want to know about the consolidated plan process. HUD provides a very specific template that you have to follow in preparing the plan. And one part of the template involves identifying needs, community needs and priorities. And it's related to these categories we're looking at: housing, community development, economic development, public services, and homelessness. If we could go to the next, please. The process we're going through right now involves meetings like this, and we've had community forum, and there's been a survey that was published online for about 6 or 7 weeks, a month or so back. But most importantly, the consolidated plan builds on and incorporates other plans and studies that have been done in the recent past. And you all individually or collectively may have been involved in some of them. Some examples are the Lynn Summit that took place in 2019 and involved a couple hundred people and a whole host of presentations and workshops. The Continuum of Care, which is a consortium of agencies that focuses on homelessness and related issues. They have their own plan. So the consolidated plan looks at and incorporates that plan, as well as the Housing Lynn plan, which was just recently published. Again, that was a process that involved many folks and stakeholders from Lynn. It was spearheaded by the mayor's office and LHAND with Metropolitan Area Planning Council. So these and other plans are part of the consolidated plan: waterfront master plan studies, etc. We could go to the next. As you'll see in a second, these are quite limited federal funds. So when we're looking at priorities for the next 5 years, the whole issue of what other federal, state, and local resources are available to help out with this project is really key. And so the consolidated plan has a section on potential funding sources, actual funding sources, etc. And those include the 3 we're talking about here, as well as numerous other funding sources. Next slide, please. As mentioned, the city's funding for these 3 programs is very limited. The primary beneficiaries have to be, under the statute, low to moderate income individuals and families, which is the majority of households in Lynn. And then just to repeat, the 3 main programs that the consolidated plan focuses on are the Community Development Block Grant Program, Cdbg, the Home Investment Partnership, and the Emergency Solutions Grant. And I just want to talk a little bit about each one. Next slide, please. So CDBG is a federal formula grant program. The city gets the funding every year, or has for decades now. Although the amounts absolutely and relatively have been decreasing over the years. CDBG focuses on providing a range of different kinds of activities, including affordable housing, services to the most vulnerable in the community. That includes seniors, people with disabilities, people who are homeless, various kinds of special populations. And it also allows for funding for job creation through the expansion and retention of businesses. Next slide, please. Not less than 70% of CDBG funds must be used for activities that directly benefit low and moderate income households. So low income is defined this is basically below area median income. Each activity funded by CDBG must meet one of the national CDBG objectives, which are shown here. Again, to benefit low, moderate income persons, to prevent or eliminate slums or blight, or address community development needs, having a particular urgency. So it's fairly broad purposes. Next slide, please. In contrast, Home Investment Partnership, it's also a federal formula program. The city receives this money every year. But the focus is specifically and exclusively to produce and preserve affordable housing. And that encompasses the entire range of activities related to that, including developing housing, buying it on the market, rehabbing it, and also providing rental assistance in the form of monthly subsidies to eligible households. Next slide. And the third program, excuse me, I jumped ahead of myself here. So home is a little bit more restrictive than CDBG. In this case, at least 90% of the funds have to benefit households with incomes that are no more than 60% of the HUD adjusted median family income. And when you actually look at the numbers, you'll see that that is pretty much a majority of the households in Lynn are eligible. In rental projects with 5, then there's some sort of tweaks to this. If there's 5 or more units in the project, at least 20% have to be occupied by even lower income families. And overall, the income of households receiving assistance through this program can't exceed 80% of the area median income, which, as I recall, is somewhere around 70-something thousand for a family of 4.
Hey, John.
Next slide, please.
Can I ask a quick clarification on this slide? The second bullet,
Please, yeah.
the rental projects with 5 or more assisted units. Is this a rental project with 5 or more deed restricted units? Or a rental project
Correct.
with 5 or more units, at least 20% of it needs to be, I'm not 100% clear as to what exactly the project is that we're talking about in that second bullet.
Right, so this actually comes from the statute, but it's a good question. So this would be an example where if the home funding is used to develop housing or to support a rental project, first of all, the home funding can only be used for families that have, or households with incomes that don't exceed 80% of area median. So that would apply, in this example of 5 units, it would apply to the entire 5 units, and they would be deed restricted if they were receiving home funding, unless it was rental assistance, which is not covered by this bullet. And in that case, one of the 5 units would have to be targeted for an even lower income household earning
Got
less than 50%.
Thank you for the yeah, thank you for the clarification.
Great. Sure, my pleasure. If we could go to the next slide. And the last of the 3 programs is the Emergency Solutions Grant. And this is again, another federal formula grant program. The city receives this funding every year. And this is specifically for the purposes listed. This is basically a homeless prevention, homelessness services program. So the types of activities that are listed here, it's everything from operating shelters, providing services to shelter residents, preventing families and individuals from becoming homeless. Those are all eligible activities under the Emergency Solutions Grant. Okay. Next slide. So this is across the top. You'll see fiscal years, and across the side you'll see the programs. Just to give you a sense of the funding, what's been the annual allocation for the program. So for Cdbg, starting all the way over on the left at the top, going back 5 years ago, the city got 2.3 million. It's pretty, it's ranged from 2.3 to 2.5 million. The funding for fiscal 2021 is 2.4 million. That excludes some special COVID money that we'll talk about in a second. The home funding is less than $1 million. It's ranged over the past 5 years from 600,000 to 900,000. The emergency shelter grant is a smaller program. It's pretty much, you can see across that line, about 200,000 a year, except for 2017 when it was about $500,000. So in total, for fiscal year 2021, this is $3.5 million to deal with a population that's now over 90,000 folks, 90,000 residents with a tremendous amount of needs. So it's very limited. And as I mentioned earlier, the need to use this money in a way that leverages other funds and that strategically targets priority needs it's pretty important because the funding, again, is so limited. Next slide, please. So because of COVID, Congress passed a law called the CARES Act. I think a lot of folks are probably familiar with that. And as a result of that, the city received a much greater allocation of emergency shelter grant funding in 2020. You can see that's 4.7 million. That in comparison to the slide we saw before, which is a typical $200,000 amount. So this was a very substantial amount of funding that was allocated to homeless services. And then for Cdbg, there was a special allocation of 2.7 million. So almost another year's worth of funding provided through COVID, through the CARES Act, excuse me. If we could go to the next slide. Just want to give you some examples of how Lynn has used these funds. And I think there are many, many more that aren't shown on these slides. It's as I mentioned, it funds, these programs fund dozens of programs and many programs which you and your family are likely to have some interaction with or some engagement with. So in terms of housing, the funds have provided first-time home buyer programs, rehab loans and grants, rental assistance, development of home ownership and rental projects are some examples of where the home and CDBG funds have been used. Next slide. Public services. There are many dozens of programs that are being funded. Public services encompass programs like services for seniors and youth, youth after school programs, youth recreation programs, arts programs, homelessness, victims of domestic violence, things like adult education, and also rental assistance is under this category as well. So there's lots and lots of examples of the way Lynn has used these funds to support public services and community programs. Next slide. CDBG funds can also be used for community and economic development, and they have been used extensively over recent decades for business loans, various types of employment training programs, also public safety, health services, etc. Then finally, the funds have been used and are being used for capital improvement projects. The city has an enormous need for infrastructure, renovations to parks, playgrounds, public facilities, street and sidewalk improvements. When you see projects going on in the city that involve renovations to the parks, to ball fields, to the Lynn Reservation, street and sidewalk improvements, etc., they're very often partially or totally funded through CDBG funds. So that's kind of it in terms of my presentation. Just to give you a flavor for what is the consolidated plan, what's the annual action plan, what are the eligible uses of funds, and I'd like to just open it up for a discussion about what do you think are the key needs and priorities of the community, recognizing that that's a pretty broad question. And where should, in your view, these limited federal dollars be used to address the needs that you think are a priority? And obviously, the fact that the city is reaching out to the Chamber of Commerce means we're especially interested in the perspectives of the business community. As I mentioned earlier, there have been a range of discussions that have already taken place. There were 2 community forums back in March. There was a community survey. We did an agency-wide meeting. And so there have been efforts to reach out to various populations throughout this process. And I think we're just especially interested in anything that, the folks on this call have to say, particularly with respect to economic development needs and issues. So I'd just like to open it up if we could. Any comments or questions?
Colin, did you have any comments or questions before we open it up to everybody?
I'll defer to the audience for now. I'll chime in a few moments, but I did want to say thank you, John, and to our city partners that are on the call as well for being involved in this project. So if you have any questions, you can either just shout them right out. If you want to raise your hand, either physically or through Zoom. Diana, are you waving or saying goodbye?
No, I have a question.
Fire away.
I know this program is really focused in affordable housing initiatives in regards of the homeless, lower income and moderate income. What I find, the experience that I find, I experienced this with my children. They're in their late 20s, 30s, graduating college, teachers at the Lynn Public Schools, ready to move to that next step, owning their own home, and there was a lot of difficulties and a lot of challenges because the assistance that they have, you either have to be, low income, and how if there's a gap between those that are starting their career in regards of housing market is very high, so home ownership is very difficult for this type of audience. So they're pushed away to move out of Lynn, out of the outside of Lynn, to New Hampshire, to Methuen. And that's what I found with just an example with my son. He's been trying to stay in Lynn and purchase a home in Lynn, but he is not able to afford it, and he does not qualify for any of the assistance. So it's that gap there is pushing families away, families that the city could actually be strengthened with in the future.
I think what you're talking about is what is commonly known as workforce housing. John, do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, certainly workforce housing is something that is key to addressing the kind of issue that Diana is talking about here today. I think if you look at the city at the Housing Lynn plan, you'll see that's while it's really a program designed to support the development of affordable housing, it's much more than that, because it focuses on strategies and even specific sites where housing can be developed as a way to increase the supply of housing overall. That includes both affordable and workforce housing and market rate housing. So all of those, I think a balanced approach that recognizes that there's a lot of people in Lynn who are in this exact band that we're talking about, workforce. They're working folks. They're not necessarily very low income, but they certainly can't afford really high market rate properties. Exactly. So these programs can certainly have an impact on workforce housing, positive impact on workforce housing, subject to the restrictions that I noted as to kind of the statutory uses. But the bottom line is that the more housing that gets built, that will help to the surge in prices, which is not only in Lynn, it's everywhere in Massachusetts. It's pretty much everywhere in the country right now. The best way to address that is by increasing the supply of housing, so that there is not such pressure on the market. I don't know if anybody, I see Jeff Whedon from Elhand, who was very involved in the housing Lynn study. Jeff, I don't want to put you on the spot if you have anything else you want to say about that.
No, I think you answered the question perfectly. I think it is a larger problem throughout the state. And a lot of the projects that a CDC or a nonprofit would work on, there's been a big focus on mixed income. It's not affordable and low income. It's really a mixed income. In mass development, mass housing actually has a workforce housing program. And Gateway North here in Lynn was the first building to take advantage of that. So we got 10 units of workforce housing units in that development. So there is a focus on trying to fix that problem. But even in the city of Lynn, 80% of the AMI, which is a lot of the home and Cdbg regulations, that's pretty generous for the city of Lynn incomes. So that does kind of address some of that middle tier income. So if there's infill housing that's going on and we do a deed restriction there at 80%, that's not low income. That is someone, that has a normal job that's just, trying to raise a family. And if you do, there's houses that we just did on Minot Street. We did 4 houses. 2 of them have deed restrictions in them. You can't tell which ones are which. I mean, it has nothing to do with, the quality of the housing, or anything of that nature. It's just, one is capped at a certain point so that someone can afford it. It's not a voucher. It's not state or federal, public housing. It's just capped. It's just deed restriction. So you can't tell the difference. So there is a lot of focus going in on that middle gap that you mentioned, along with the affordable. The affordable obviously there's always going to be a need, but you're right that there is a squeeze on that middle income that we're trying to focus on as well.
Any other questions for
Thank
John
you.
right now? That was a great question, Diana. Thank you. All right, I'll throw one out there. One of the things that we've talked about as a chamber for a while is building on creating the entrepreneurial spirit, turning Lynn into an incubator hub for business startups and young businesses, and really tapping into the talent and the innovation coming out of Cambridge, and using Lynn as the hub for that offshoot for either skilled manufacturing or any other business. As you may know, any business, one of the biggest problems is startup costs. So what we've really been pushing and wanting to focus on is creating shared workspace opportunities, incubator centers, for an array of industries, whether it be advanced manufacturing or food, the food industry for young entrepreneurs who want to start a food business, or the textile business, or whatever it may be. These are capital investments that often delay or fail young startup businesses. So from a investment in the city and an economic development standpoint, having a long-term vision, these incubator hubs and these shared workspaces are huge opportunities to bring in entrepreneurial dollars, bring in entrepreneurial jobs, create a successful entrepreneurial environment, and that is what's going to grow the business community and create local jobs that are mid to higher level paying opportunities, skilled labor, not working at the dollar store. So these are great opportunities. And if we're talking about investment into the city for a long-term vision, that's something that the chamber is very supportive of.
Is there much going on or anything going on in the city in this area? Are there any shared workspaces or incubators that you're aware of right now?
There's
Very minor.
Yeah, there's one that's that's I think underutilized. It's a great vision. It's a great space. Glenn, what refresh me on the name? The Brickyard, is it?
No, Brickyard is it's not a shared work. Well, it is shared, but it's not really what would describe as a shared workspace. Incubate.
Yeah, Incubate is that's an office space. That's kind of a, but doesn't the Brickyard have some shared resources?
I don't think so. We could find out, but I believe that you can share their equipment, but they really don't have space where you could set up a company, to my knowledge.
But from a food incubator standpoint, there's nothing. And we have a huge food industry. From a textile standpoint, where you look at a large scale embroidery machine, these are hundreds of thousands of dollars potentially to be able to have anything close to production capacity. These are great opportunities for small businesses to have to start up and get moving and get going. We don't really have those resources in place to support those young entrepreneurs or to attract people to come here and set up and start their business in support of any type of level of advanced manufacturing, whether high-end 3D printers or whatever it may be.
Well, we do have, Brickyard does have some of those of the 3D printers, not truly high-end, but they are growing, Brickyard Collaborative. And Carolyn Cole did confirm that the co-working space is Incubate.
Yes, that's a shared office space. It's great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's great.
So one of the things that
it's a
appeared
great thought, and it's certain
from the CDBG funds, it would sound like some of those activities in terms of setting up shared workspaces for, in this case, specific industries might be doable under some small amount of that very limited funding.
Yes, I agree. It's absolutely, assuming that it benefits the target population, at least to some degree. I agree. It's absolutely an eligible use. It's a great thought.
The food operation we're looking at is basically a ghost kitchen kind of operation where somebody, and it could be somebody of currently limited income, that could go in and try out a food concept and have the kind of support they would need to make a company out of it and hire people.
I think what you oftentimes see around the country in a project like this is where some driven entrepreneurial folks like we may have on the call here kind of pursue an idea like this, begin to put together some commitments of funding sources, and then go to the city looking for gap financing or seed money to help move the idea forward. Because again, job generation for low and moderate income people is absolutely a key goal of the CDBG program. Given the amount of funding it takes to kind of support an operation like this, this would be, to me, yet another example of where you'd need to put together alternative funding sources to help to support, to help to move the ball forward.
Mm-hmm.
Any other thoughts or questions or ideas from the members here?
Or money. We take money too.
We're not soliciting money here today. We're soliciting thoughts. Brain capital, that's what I want.
There you go.
Bill.
Hey, Colin, thanks. Jim Massari wasn't able to join this morning, but he has a long history of working with John, and just wanted to thank John for the work that you put together in pulling this and presenting it this morning. He's very supportive of both you, John, and just wanted to say hi and asked me to relay his well wishes and looks forward to hopefully seeing you sometime soon. So thanks again for all the work, John. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. That's very nice. Thank you.
Well, I don't want to keep us here, and just to make it to the hour. So one last kind of call out there for any thoughts or ideas that we'd want the consolidated plan to consider, to address, or any other thoughts.
And while people are thinking about that, I would also just note that, please feel free to contact me. I'm sure Colin can pass out my contact information. I'll make sure he has it. And, email me, call, make sure that your ideas get passed on and incorporated into the plan.
Great. Well, thank you, everybody. Our next meeting, are we going to do a July meeting, Colin, or no? So our next meeting will be in September, and it will be the first Wednesday in September, which is normally we do our meetings on the first Wednesday at 8:30, and you'll all get some notifications about the subject of that meeting as we get closer.
Well,
So thank you.
We might make it the second Wednesday, but we'll look into it because it's Wednesday the 1st. But we'll certainly follow up this summer with other activities that we're doing. My last pitch is a couple of programs we have for the chamber coming up. We have an awesome baseball game this weekend. So if anyone's up for a baseball game to see the North Shore Navigators kick off their home season, it's going to be a great game this weekend. It's Friday at 5:30. At the end of the month, we have our State of the Region address, where we have municipal leaders from Swampscott, Nahant, and the city of Lynn all discussing kind of where they've been over the past 6 months, and more importantly, where we're going. Really hearing that message from our municipal leaders is a great program. That's a breakfast. We're going to be doing it in person under a tent. It's going to be an amazing opportunity. And then we have some programs over the summer where we're going to be working with the any member running for an office is going to have an opportunity to kind of meet the chamber. And then our golf committee or our golf tournament is at the end of August. So those are kind of the next on slate for the chamber. Keep an eye out for some awesome ribbon cuttings that are coming up to celebrate some new and existing businesses. And with that, I thank you all very much for being here. John, it was wonderful you to join us. We thank you tremendously. And to all of our friends and members, we'll see you soon and have a wonderful summer.
Bye all.
Thanks, everybody.